Hilchos Talmud Torah, Perek Revi'i, Chapter 4, Laws of Torah Study. Today we're going to learn more about teachers and students, how we actually learn, go about the process of studying Torah and teaching Torah. It says that Rambam Halacha Aleph, Ein melamdin Torah ela letalmid hagun. We only teach Torah to a fitting, a proper student, na'eh b'ma'asav, who behaves nicely, his actions are proper. In other words, you would think Torah is an academic study, so who cares how you act? No, Torah study goes together with behavior. If you don't behave properly, you don't deserve to learn. O letam, or to somebody who's unknown. I know in the Haggadah, tam means the simple guy. Here we're talking about tam milashon tamim, anonymous. A new student comes to town, we don't know if he's good or bad. Give him the benefit of the doubt, you can teach him.
They're kicking kids out that misbehave.
Well, it's not kids. This is students in a bet midrash. Yeah, this is already higher level study. Aval im haya holech b'derech lo tova. But if he would go in a bad path, a not good path, and we know what the good path is, that's the derech yishara. It's the middle path in every single character trait. If he's not following that path, machzirin oto lemutav. We first make sure to bring him back to the good. Uman higin oto b'derech yishara, and we help him behave in the straight path. Ubod kinoto, then we check him to make sure he's still living this way. And only that afterwards do we bring him into the study hall, and we teach him. Interesting point you made before. So we don't kick anybody out. Even the guys that don't behave well, we straighten them out. Exactly. We spend time training them, and then we bring them back in. Amru Chachamim, said the sages, Kol hashoneh letalmid she'eino hagun. Any teacher that teaches an unbecoming student, an improperly behaved student, ki ilu zarak even lemarkulis. It's as though he's throwing a stone to Avodah Zarah. I think he's called Mercury. He's from Roman god. He was the god of travelers. And they used to put 3 stones in front of him in a triangle. And the way you would worship him was by throwing more stones at him. That's the way of serving him. Strange service. But if you teach an improper student, it's like throwing stones to Markulis. What's the comparison? Just like throwing stones over there is useless. So here also you're throwing information into the student, but it's useless. It's not going to come to any good purpose. Shanei Amar, as it says, Kitzror even b'margema, like putting a stone in a sling, kein noten liksil kavod. That's what it's like when you give a fool honor. The ein kavod ala Torah. Honor here refers to Torah. Shanei Amar, kavod chachamim yinchalu. The wise people inherit honor. Of course, wise people are not after physical, literal honor. So, of course, they're after Torah. So, kavod means Torah. So, in the other verse, when it says noten liksil kavod, that also means giving Torah to a fool, and that's like throwing a stone. The Alter Rebbe writes that this is only for the teacher. The teacher can't teach the student, but if a student sees that he's struggling in his actions and he wants to learn more, he has to do what he can. Put in the effort to try to get into the study hall and see if he can push and indeed get taught Torah. V'chein harav. So too on the other side. That's about a student. What about a teacher? She'eino holech b'derech tova. A teacher doesn't go in a proper way. Afal pi shechacham gadol, he may be a very wise man. V'chol ha'am tzrichin lo, and the entire nation needs him. Ein mitlamdin mimenu ad shuvod lemutav. We cannot learn from him until he returns to the good. Shnei Amar, as it says, ki siftei kohen yishmeru da'at. The lips of a kohen keep knowledge. V'torah yavakshu mipiu, and we can request Torah from his mouth. Why? Ki malach Hashem tzvaotu, because he's an angel of Hashem, which means, Amru Chachamim said the sages, im harav domeh. The malach Hashem tzvaot, if the teacher is similar in his behavior to an angel, Torah yavakshu mipiu, then you can ask Torah from his mouth. In lav, but if not, al yavakshu Torah mipiu, we may not request Torah from his mouth. So that's why today, when teachers are caught misbehaving in other ways, we let them go. There was one incident in the Talmud where there was a very misbehaved teacher, let's call him, who still taught Torah. That was Acher. He was a famous apikritos, a famous apostate, and Rabbi Meir used to still learn from him. So they asked him, how could you? He's not like an angel. So he said he was unique. He takes a pomegranate, tocho achal, klipato zarak. He has a talent of eating the inside and throwing out the outside. The reason why we don't want a regular misbehaved teacher to teach is because he might throw in some of his ideas, his wrong ideas. Yeah. But if you know how to differentiate, then you can listen even to them. But that's not for regular people. We still call him Acher. Rabbi Meir because of that. Yes, exactly. So it's not a method of behavior for everybody. Okay. Halacha bet. Keitzad melamdim. How do we teach? What's the order of teaching Torah? Harav yoshev barosh. The teacher sits at the head. V'hatalmidim mukafim lefanav ka'atara. And the students would surround him like a crown. So many commentaries say this means like a half circle, semicircle. Some people say actually means a full circle, because there's a statement in the Gemara where a certain sage said, the reason why I'm so smart is because I saw Rabbi Meir from his back. If I would have seen him from the front, I would have been even smarter. So from that it's implied that when he was teaching, his back was to some of his students. So maybe there was a full circle, but the simple meaning seems to be a half circle. So everybody can see the teacher. And hear his words. Again, either it means see him literally in his face, or see him at least see him. Because just seeing already creates a more powerful learning experience. However, there's one limitation to how you teach. The teacher shouldn't sit on a nice chair while his students sit on the ground. Either everybody on the ground or everybody on chairs. Earlier in history, the teacher used to sit and the students used to stand out of respect. But ever since, just before the destruction of the Second Temple, the Talmud says sickness came down to the world, weakness, and they couldn't stand for so long, so everybody began to teach students when they're sitting. Now, if a teacher and student are supposed to be equal, how could there ever have been a time when the teacher sat and the students stood? So the Lechem Mishnah was a primary commentary here. He says that the reason in the olden days teachers used to sit was not because they didn't want to be equal to their students, like they're greater. It was because when you're teaching material, you want to be more focused. And when you're sitting, you can be more focused. But when indeed everybody began to sit, there was no difference. No teacher can't sit on a chair and them on the ground. They have to be equal. So that's how the setup of the learning goes. Halacha Gimel. It seems like there was two ways to teach. Some teachers would teach on their own, and some teachers would have a helper. If a teacher wanted to teach from his mouth to the students, melamed, he can teach. But if he chose to teach through a mitargem either means a translator, because the sages used to speak in Hebrew, even though everybody spoke Aramaic, they wanted to teach Torah in Hebrew, and the translator would literally translate. Others say mitargem is an amplifier. Most rabbis, they couldn't speak so loud, there was no microphones, so the mitargem was their microphone. They would say, and then the mitargem would say loudly what they said. There's another opinion that says that mitargem is actually an interpreter, that the teacher would speak in short code, and the mitargem would explain it. But the Rambam doesn't hold of that, because we're going to see that the Rambam says the mitargem can't change a word from what the teacher said. So either he's a translator or an amplifier. So if you were choosing to teach through this a translator or amplifier, ha-mitargem omed beino uben talmidim. So the way it used to work was that this mitargem would stand between the teacher and the students. V'harav omer la-mitargem. The teacher would talk to this translator. V'ha-mitargem mashmiya l'chol talmidim. And the translator, the amplifier, would mashmiya. He would make it heard to all the students. Ukishehen sho'alin la-mitargem. When the students would ask questions, they would ask the translator. Hu sho'el larav, he would then ask the teacher. V'harav meshiv la-mitargem, the teacher would answer the translator. V'ha-mitargem meshiv la-sho'el, and the translator would answer the questioner. And the rule was, v'lo yagbiya harav kolo yoter mikol la-mitargem. The teacher could never raise his voice higher than the voice of the translator or the amplifier. So even if he got very upset during the shiur, what are you saying? And he can never raise his voice above the mitargem. V'lo yagbiya ha-mitargem kolo. And the translator shouldn't raise his voice. Be'et shesho'el et harav, when he's asking a question of the teacher, yoter mikol harav, more than the voice of the teacher. So when the conversation is going outward towards the students, the highest voice is the translator's voice. Teacher can't go past that. When the conversation is going inwards towards the teacher, so the mitargem has to lower his voice to the voice of the teacher. And the rule is, eina mitargem rashai. The translator is not allowed, lo lifchot, v'lo lehosif, v'lo leshanot. He can't take away anything, can't add anything, can't change anything. He has to say exactly what the teacher said, either in translation or in amplification. Elaim came with two exceptions. One exception is if hayah hameturgeman aviv shel chacham or rabo. If it happened that the translator was actually the father of the teacher or his own teacher. If that ended up happening, then the mitargem can take the liberty to add or change based on what he felt was right.
How can it be his rabbi?
How can it be his rabbi? Like it's not kavod, right? Yeah. The Talmud seems to indicate that there was one time that it happened when there was the teacher was giving the student permission to teach a class, kind of like you give the shiur, and I'll transmit it. So in that case, if the younger Chacham made any mistakes, the teacher would correct it. So that's one case where the Metargem can change. Another case is like this. This is not really a substance change, but it's just semantics, a way of talking change. Omer harav la-meturgeman. Let's say the teacher said to the translator, Kach amar li Rabbi. This is what my teacher said. So he's quoting his own teacher. Or Kach amar li Abba Mari. Or this is what my father said. A person is not allowed to use his teacher's or father's name. So when the teacher is talking about his own teacher or his own father, he's going to say, my teacher, my father. He won't say his name. So when the translator then transmits the words to the nation, to the people, Omer b'shem hechacham, he talks in the name of this wise man that's being quoted, umazkir shmo shel avi harav o shel rabo. But he can mention the actual name of the guy's father or the guy's teacher. Omer, and he says, Kach amar Rabbana ploni. So said Master so-and-so, Rabbi so-and-so. Afal pisha lo hizkir harav et shmo shel hachacham. Even though the teacher didn't mention the name of the sage, but that's for a different reason. Sha'asur likrot l'rabo o la'aviv bishmo. The teacher had a different problem. He couldn't call his own teacher or his own father by his name. So he said, my father, my teacher. But this translator just say, Mr. So-and-so said. The Talmud gives the case of Mar Barav Ashi, who was the last sage who wrote the Talmud. So when he would quote his father, he would say, my father said so-and-so. And the Metargem would say, Kach Amar Rav Ashi. That's what Rav Ashi said, because he has no problem with calling Rav Ashi by his name. Halacha Dalet. Harav shalam limed v'lo hivinu at-talmidim. If a teacher teaches the lesson and the students don't get it, lo yichas alehem v'yirgaz. The teacher should not get angry or mad with them. Elah chozer v'shoneh hadavar. You should go back and repeat the thing, afilu kama pamim, even many times, ad sheyavinu omek halacha, till they understand the depth of the halacha. Rabbi Preda was famous for teaching a student one time 400 times a lesson because the guy didn't get it. Rabbi Preda was it. Very good. That's very good. And on the flip side, the student should never say, Hevanti, I understood, if he didn't understand. Just like you want to look good or you want to convince yourself that you understood. Don't say that I get it if you don't get it. He should go back and ask even many times. Let's say the teacher made the wrong decision. He did get upset. He did get mad. Yomarlo, the student should say, Rebbe, Torahi, it's just Torah. I have to learn. My mind is short. Just try again. That's hard because if the teacher's getting angry at you, typically the student just backs off, But here you go, no, you got to push. Halacha hey, lo yiyeh talmid bosh mechaverav. The student shouldn't either be embarrassed from his friends. Shalamdu mipam rishona o shniya. They learned the first or second time. V'hu lo lamad ela achar kama pamim. And he only learned after a number of times. This is not talking about during learning. That was the last halacha. During learning, you shouldn't be embarrassed. Even after you learned, and now you see, hey, I'm the slowpoke. I don't get things till after 5-6 times, and my friends all get it after 1 or 2. You can't be embarrassed. Because if you're going to be embarrassed about this thing, nimtza, it's going to come out, and I have many friends that went through yeshiva like this. Nichnas v'yotzeh lebet hamidrash v'hu eno lamed klum. Every morning he comes into the bet hamidrash, and in the evening he leaves. He didn't learn anything. Why? Because he was embarrassed to ask questions. Therefore, the early sages said, "En habayshan lamed, v'lo hakapdan melamed." The embarrassed one is not going to learn, and the short-tempered, they say over here. The short-tempered teacher cannot be a teacher because he's going to lose his cool too fast. When is the above apply? When can't a teacher get upset? Bizman shelo hevinu hatalmidim hadavar mipnei omko. If he sees that the students didn't understand the subject because the subject was so deep, or because their minds are limited. That could happen. They're not so smart. But if the teacher has insight and he can see, they don't just not get it. They're being lazy about their learning. They're not giving it their all. And that's why they didn't understand. Over here, so the teacher actually should get upset with them, and could use some words to embarrass them, to sharpen their skills. And about this, the sages said, sometimes you have to throw poison at the students. In other words, if you see that they're doing not so good because they could be doing better, then show them a piece of your mind. Earlier in Hilchot Deyot, we learned that you should never actually get mad. You should just get ebifneim. You should just show as if you're mad. So how could the Rambam say over here, chayav lirgoz? So there are many commentaries deal with this. The Rebbe once said that it means that you're talking about students that you can't fool. If you can fool the students, then just show that you're mad. But if they're so close with you that they know when you're faking it, then you have to really get upset with them. And so that's like the one exception, because you got to bring them back on the path. Lefichach, for this reason, because sometimes the teacher has to give rebuke and it has to be serious, it's not befitting that a teacher should ever behave lightheadedly in front of his students. He shouldn't laugh too much in front of them. He shouldn't eat or drink with them, so that his fear is always upon them. And when it comes time, they're going to learn from him quickly. If he just, on the side plays basketball with them, then when it's time for serious business, then it's not going to happen the way it should. Halacha Vav. En sho'alin et harav k'sheyikanes lamidrash. You don't ask questions to a teacher the moment he enters the study hall. You have to let his mind calm down for a bit, let him sit down, relax, have a coffee, and then you can ask him questions. Neither should the student run into shul and start asking questions. Sit down a little bit, take a drink. Calm down, rest, and then go and ask. Two students should never ask at once. And you should also not ask a teacher a different subject matter. If he's teaching now Shabbat, don't ask him about Yom Tov. Only in the subject matter which they're dealing with. Interesting, they shouldn't get embarrassed. Teacher prepared his lecture on this subject. Don't ask him about other subjects. But the Rav he's allowed to do the opposite. A teacher can mislead the students with his questions, and even do certain questionable things in front of them, to sharpen them. To know if they remember what he did, what he taught them, or if they don't remember. So he'll do something purposely that looks, halachically improper. And then the student will protest and they'll go, now I see that you remember what we learned. Or he'll ask them a question which he just taught yesterday, and they say, Rebbe, you just taught us yesterday. You see, now I see you remember. It's needless to say, he can ask them any subject that he wants, that they're not dealing with kedei lezarzam, in order to spur them on, in order to get them going. You don't ask a question standing, you don't answer a question standing. You don't ask a question or answer from being too high. Upstairs, downstairs, that kind of a thing. Or not too far. And not from behind the elders. It seems like the front row was reserved for the older people and students in the back. If you're asking a question, come to the front, show your face. Don't have to ask from behind the crowd, hey Rabbi, help me out. We only ask the teacher questions in the subject which they're learning. So we already said this before. What are we repeating it again? So some commentaries say that here we're talking about within the same subject, don't change subjects. So before we're saying if you're learning Shabbat, don't ask him Yom Tov. Here, in Shabbat itself, if we're talking about one melacha, don't ask him about another piece of work. So whatever, stay super focused on your subject. Others actually delete these words. They say, it's supposed to say, Ve'ein shalin harav ela ki'inyan. That's it. You should ask questions to the point. Be direct with your questions. Don't go on and ramble. Ve'ein shalin ela miyir'ah. You can only ask in a state of awe and respect. You don't ask in a making fun tone or in a not serious tone. Or confrontational, like kanter, exactly. You also shouldn't ask in a subject matter more than 3 halachot. This means new information. Like you ask a rabbi, and what if this would happen? And what if that would happen? 3 new what ifs are too much already. There's 3 new laws. Your mind won't be able to take more than that and to retain it. Exactly. Halacha chet. Shnayim sheshalu. What happens if you have 2 students asking a question? They're not asking at once, one after the other, but you want to answer both. So who do you answer first? It says that there's an order. Sha'al echad ki'inyan, v'sha'al echad shelo ki'inyan. If one asked to the point, and another one asked not to the point, or some say bi'inyan, one asked in subject or out of subject, nizkakin le'inyan. You always go to the one who asked to the point, or on subject matter. Ma'aseh v'she'ino ma'aseh, a practical question and a non-practical, theoretical question, nizkakin la'ma'aseh, we go to practical. Halacha or midrash. If one is asking about practical halacha, another one is asking about interpretation of the verses in the Torah, nizkakin lahalacha, we go to halacha. It's more practical.
Why is it different than maaseh?
Maaseh and maaseh are both halacha questions, but one is practical and one's theoretical. Here we're talking about, it could even be theoretical, but it's in a different realm of Torah.
Like for instance, maybe if someone was asking like a question about the temple service today, it's like a halakha.
That's halacha, exactly. And then midrash would be, how do you explain the vav in the word, vihadag or something? Halacha or midrash is again halacha. Midrash v'agada, what if you're asking, one is asking about interpretation of the verses, and one is asking about agada, which is like homiletics, so it's not interpretation literally, it's more like metaphysical, and agada, nizkakin la midrash. You go to, again, what's more practical. In this case, it's interpreting the verses. Agada v'kal v'chomer, if you're asking about homiletics, or kal v'chomer is now a principle to derive new things from the Torah. Kal v'chomer means light and heavy. If something applies to the lenient case, it certainly applies in the stringent case. So that's a method of learning. So here, nizkakin le kal v'chomer, even though kal v'chomer is new information, it's not already written agada, still, since it's more practical and related to interpreting the Torah, we go there. Kal v'chomer u'gzeira shava. What if you're in two principles? One is logical, kal v'chomer. One is gzeira shava. This means if you have two identical words in two separate passages, you can infer laws from one to the other. But this is not logical. This only goes by tradition. Only if Moshe Rabbeinu said these two words can learn from each other, do you follow that. So one is logical, one's illogical. Nizkakin lekal v'chomer. You go to the logical one. Why? Say the commentaries, because the illogical ones everyone will remember. It's like a code. This is what we do, this is what we don't do. Kal v'chomer is new logic. A human can apply his own brain to it. So if you don't get into it right now, you may forget your method and then you lose a part of Torah. Hayu ha'sho'alin shnayim. What if the questioners were two people? Echad chacham ve'echad talmid. One wiser and one a student. Nizkakin lechacham. You go to the wise man. Talmid va'amaretz. A student and a ignoramus. Nizkakin latalmid. You go to the student. Shnehem chachamim. What if they're both equal? They're both wise. Shnehem talmidim. They're both students. Shnehem me'aretz. So they're both ignoramuses. Sha'alu shnehem bishtei halachot. Or they both ask two identical halachot. Or bishtei tshuvot. Or bishtei sheilot. It's one thing. Or they want to give answers to two questions. Shnei Maasim, where they're both asking a practical action question. So now, Harishut Bi'adam Etargem Me'ata, from now, the translator, he gets to choose. If he likes one guy better, he can take his question first. He gets to decide the order. And finally, Halakha Tet, En Yeshenim Bebet HaMidrash. We cannot sleep in a study hall. B'chala mitnamnem bebet HaMidrash. If you do doze off in a study hall, Chochmato na'aset kraim kraim. His wisdom will be torn to shreds. V'chein amar Shlomo b'chochmato. And so said Shlomo in his wisdom, Ukraim talbish numa. Ripped clothes will be the clothes of sleep. In other words, you sleep, you're going to end up with torn wisdom. In a study hall, we only talk Torah matters. Even if somebody sneezed. We don't say zu gesund in a study hall. And certainly other things we don't talk about. Rambam saying, I'm talking about study hall specifically. That's more important, that's more high level than a shul like what we're in right now. Well, shul we're going to talk about later in Hilchot Tefillah. This extra staying away from idle talk is only in a bet midrash.